folks. Thank you. Like our MC said, my name's Adrian. I work for Pydantic, and I'm going to be presenting to you today about Logfire. This is a sponsored talk. Logfire is one of the sponsors of the conference. I gave a talk earlier that I think some of you were at about just general observability, and there's going to be kind of a follow-up of like, okay, now what does that mean if I actually want to use Logfire for that? Yeah, so just who I am. I do open source work at Starlet, Pydantic, some fast API. That's how I ended up working at Pydantic. Just started from open source contributions, and now I'm an engineer building Logfire. So who is Logfire? It started as Pydantic, an open source project, as some of you may know, and we got funding from venture capital to build a commercial product. And Logfire is the commercial product that we're trying to build in hopes of making a company, but also sustaining the development of Pydantic. So I'm going to start first by just saying a little bit about like what Logfire is, because just being at the booth, one of the most common questions was like, so do I run it? You know, is it a library? You know, what is it? Especially, it makes sense coming from Pydantic. It's like, okay, you made another library like Pydantic, right? And really, Logfire is a bit more complicated than that. It's an observability platform. There is a free open source component to it, which is the SDK. This is the code that you would run. And that part is liberally licensed. You can copy it, you can run it, you can edit it. And it's built on top of OpenTelemetry, which is also an open source project. So in other words, all the code that you run that you put in your code is free and open source. However, that SDK sends the data to the Logfire service. The Logfire service is the product that is a commercial product that we run on our infrastructure. We will have a self-hosted solution at some point, but the point is that's not a free open source product. And I think it's important just to be clear. And the SDK can also send data to your terminal and can send it to like other open source observability platforms. So most of this talk is actually going to be a demo. I just want to go through what actually using Logfire looks like and show you some of the functionality, because I think that's much better than me just standing up here and giving you like theoretical information about it. So here's the demo I have. I'm going to make some assumptions that some of you have used Fast API before. Let's see, how's the font size there? I probably want to make it bigger. I think that's good. It's people in the back. Good. Okay. I'm going to assume you've used Fast API before, but if you haven't, if you've used Flask, it's a web framework. So we're going to be doing a little bit of web stuff. Logfire is not only for web stuff. It can be used for pretty much anything you want. I was talking to someone earlier about using it to measure user errors in a GUI application that does stuff in a lab, and like, yeah, it can be used for that. But one of the big use cases is web stuff. So that's what I'm going to be demoing. So here I have a Fast API app that has one endpoint. It takes in a request with a user's name, and then it runs some database queries. I purposefully put some sleeps in here, both in the database query and in my endpoint, just as a simple way to be like, yeah, this is something we're going to be debugging. It's easy to understand. Of course, real world is probably a lot more complex. Like, you didn't add an index to your database, but for the purpose of a demo, I'd like to keep it simple. So this is my Fast API app, pretty simple. I have a client that's just going to, in a loop, send over requests. Just keep sending over requests to my backend, and yeah, and we're going to see what it looks like to add observability for this. So of course, if I just run this, this is just going to run, and it's a Fast API app, and it doesn't really do anything. And then I can run my client, and it's just going to also just do nothing, and I can't really see what's going on. So it's not very interesting, right? But let's start by seeing what it looks like to add telemetry to the application. I'm realizing now it's going to be. Do we have a stand? Do we have a stand? A stand for the mic? Okay. If you can get that, I think that'd be good. I'll try and hold this one in code at the same time, but I'm realizing it'll be difficult. So the first thing you can do is install Logfire. That's just pip install Logfire. And now you can import it. So I'm going to import Logfire. Now you're going to have to Logfire configure fire dot configure. And here I'm going to add a service name. Logfire autocomplete, which is going to be demo. That's all you need to get started. So if I run this now, it'll ask me to pick a project. Okay, so I've run logfire.configure, and if I run this, it'll ask me to authenticate and pick a project, which I think I already picked one, so might not do, but yeah. Normally it'll ask you, if you just run that, it'll ask you to like log in. Creating an account is pretty easy. I can walk through that in a sec, but it's not actually going to start emitting any telemetry. There's a couple different ways to start emitting telemetry. There's like manual instrumentation, which would be if I come here and I do logfire.span, hello, I can do this and start emitting that. So now if I run my client's still not doing anything. But here I'll be able to open this project. And I'll see now that I'm starting to get stuff. Ooh, lots of stuff coming in. Where's this one? Oh, this is client. This is the older stuff. Let's see, is it? Did I restart my app? Okay, there we go. Hello world. Where's demo? Well, let's keep adding more stuff. So this is what manual instrumentation would look like. You're manually putting in a line of code in your code to start emitting telemetry. There's also automatic instrumentation, which is if I do logfire.instrument fast API and pass in my app. Now this is every endpoint for any fast API endpoints you have are automatically going to get the arguments extracted from them, the timing, all that sort of information. You can make it extract more information, but by default, it extracts just timing, function name, endpoint, argument, just stuff that really isn't sensitive most of the time. So now, oh, it's because my client died. That's what was going on. So now this thing will start sending all these fast API arguments. So you see, yeah, here now I have demo, and this is what we call our live view, which is kind of like if you were just printing to your console, except in a more structured way. So here you see I'm starting to get these fast API arguments, line number 40 in demo main.py. This is the manual span I put in, right, where I just said, oh, is it too small? How's that? This is a manual span I put in, right? So you can see the world there, hello world. So if I change this to something like Roger, and restart this thing, you'll see now I'm going to start getting hello Roger. There's Roger. So that's manual instrumentation. This is the automatic instrumentation. I can go and instrument more things here. So I can say, okay, now I'm going to instrument psychopg, because that's the database driver I'm using. I'm going to go and instrument Logfire, instrument, well, I'm not using HTTPX here, so I think that's good enough for our backend. But then in our little client application, which could be another, another service you're running, here I'm going to set up Logfire. And again, it's just one line of code. So this I'll call this one client, and then I'll say logfire.instrument HTTPX. So now if I start running my client again, you'll see I'm starting to get here in the console. I'm getting the kind of printed out, but then also back in my project, now I'm starting to get things coming from the client. And this is what we call distributed tracing. The client is sending a request to the backend, and the backend is getting an ID from the client that says which request this was. So now the observability platform, Logfire, can tell that the request went from the client to the backend. And if I restart my backend, I'm going to start getting the telemetry from PsychoPG. So from all my database queries. So here are my database queries, right? I can see my sleep, and I can see my other query that's just selecting the length of a string. So where do we go from here? Well, you know, if you were, I don't know why my sleep is 0 seconds, but probably doing something wrong in Postgres. If you're trying to diagnose, you know, slow code, we're already in a much better place because I can tell what is taking, you know, what amount of time here, right? Like everything is happening within this hello span. All the slow code is here. And there's a lot of dead time here. So it's like, okay, what's going on after this, right? Like, why is this taking so long if there's a bunch of dead time there? Well, if I go look at my code, I'm then calling, I'm taking the length of the string I generated and calling a fib function with that. And what happens inside of that fib function? Oh, surprise, there's another sleep there. So how can I, you know, I have all this code. How can I diagnose what's slow in it? We have a feature called auto tracing. So I can do install auto tracing, and I'm going to install it in demo.compute. And now if I restart my backend, oh, I need to put it up here. Yep, that'll do. So I'll restart my backend. I'll start sending my requests again. There's my new request coming in. And hello, oh, look, it's telling me I'm calling fib, and I'm calling fib, and I'm calling fib recursively. But now I can see each one of those function calls, and I can see how long they each took. So with no changes, I made no changes to this, you know, little fib function here. I'm getting telemetry out of it. And this just goes to show how you can take an existing project that maybe just has logging or even has absolutely no observability whatsoever. And with one line of code, boom, all of a sudden you're getting a ton of valuable information out of it with Logfire. If I want even more information from here, I can do logfire.instrument. And now I can, you know, maybe you found that this was a slow function and now you're like, okay, I really want to keep track of that and make sure that doesn't happen again. So I'm going to get rid of this auto tracing, restart the backend with that decorator there. There's a lot of logs being sent out. So now that I put the decorator on it, I can actually capture the arguments of the function. So if I go here, you'll see I have my n equals 10, and then obviously if I go inside of that, I'll have my n equals 9, and then if I go inside of that, I have my, you know, n equals 8. It's, you know, a recursive Fibonacci function, so that's not too surprising. But I want to show you now is how powerful our search is. So I can do something like, I can say attributes, which is where that n's ending up, n equals 8. And now it's going to highlight for me, I can ask it to only show me the spans. So I can ask it to only show me the spans. So now I'm seeing every call to fib that had n equals 8, right? I can also have it show me, I can have it show me the whole trace, but you can go even further with that because this is actually full SQL. It's Postgres flavored SQL, but I can do something like trace ID in select where I do, you know, a correlated subquery like this and do all kinds of stuff. So when would you do something like this? Like, let's say you want to find, you know, you have some slow database queries, but you want to find all the slow database queries for endpoints that had a certain fast API argument. So now you can search for all the endpoints that have that argument, you know, find their trace ID, and find all the spans that have queries that match that. If you want to do more complex stuff, you can come over here to our explore view. And now, before we were writing the where clause for SQL, now I can write a full SQL. So I can do select count star from records where attributes n equals 8 or 9 or whatever, right? So I can do this, yep, run it, and I'll get 88. And data is constantly being sent. So if I run this again, I'm now 90, 90. But again, Postgres filtered SQL. Do you want to count the request latency bucketed by day? Sure, no problem. Just write the SQL to bucket it by day. We even let you connect the tools that you're familiar with to this. So you can create a connection string and connect pandas or polars. And now you can use pandas to query your observability data. So this unlocks a ton of opportunities for things you can do. You can do analytics on your observability data. You can track the exceptions. Like we can add an exception here and say 1/0 in our backend. Oops. Go live. And now I'm getting a bunch of errors, right? Error. And I can say is exception equals true, and filter down to just the errors. So I think the key things I want you to take away from this is that Logfire is really easy to set up. If you were at my talk earlier and you saw what it looks like to set up OpenTelemetry on its own, it's 20, 30 lines of code, a bunch of concepts. Logfire is 1, 2 lines of code depending on what you're trying to do. Logfire is not only easy to set up, but gives you a ton of power. We saw how you can use the auto tracing to get information without editing your code at all. We saw how you can use auto instrumentation to get really deep information out of Fast API, out of your database driver, and we also saw how you can use it to do sort of like analytics or even more advanced types of queries. We also we don't just show you like HTTP requests and stuff. We have a ton of integrations. So like if I go to let me go back to database queries. So I want to show a database query. Well, I'm now raising exceptions everywhere. So let's get rid of those. Okay, so if I go to one of these with the database queries, you'll see that I get like nicely formatted queries. We even support query plans. So if you just like explain analyze, we can show you a nicely formatted query plan. So you would immediately know like, oh, this query is slow and it's because I'm missing an index. We also have integrations with like LLMs. So if you use OpenAI, we have excellent integrations with OpenAI, and you can get something like this where you see the prompt you give it, you see the response you got, and all kinds of stuff like that. So I want to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to end the demo there. I know we could keep going and doing, like build a full application here, but I think I just want to know, yeah, what questions you have, what you're interested in about Logfire, what parts do you not understand of how to run it, or anything like that.
Are you finished?
Yep, I'm finished.
We have a lot of questions.
Oh, okay, that's good.
This question, any plans to open source the Logfire backend similar to how Sentry did it?
I mean, yes, we're an open source based company. We don't have any specific plan yet. I can't promise you that we're going to adopt a specific license or anything. Right now, we're mainly focused on being able to iterate and develop the product as quickly as possible. And it's easier to do that if it's just a closed source product that we own. We're a very open source focused company. We will, at some point be open sourcing bits of it or something, but I can't make any promises as to what or when or how.
Okay. Do I need to worry about Logfire adding overhead to my application?
It's a great question. Logfire does a lot to not add overhead. I was explaining in my earlier talk, like the way things get exported, there's background threads that run that batch the data. then they send it over protobuf, which is a very efficient serialization format. It gets compressed on top of that. So there's a lot going on to minimize the overhead of, over your application. It's not zero overhead. I'd say as long as you don't put it in something like a hot loop, like, a sorting function for a list or something like that. If you're putting it in, database queries or like, surrounding like, a pandas operation on a relatively large data frame, then you're not going to notice any overhead.
Okay. Which database have you used?
Inside of Logfire?
Yes.
Well, currently we use a database called Timescale. We're kind of building our own homegrown solution on top of Parquet using data fusion. But that's all really work in progress and not something that you'd have to worry about.
Okay. What is the syntax for the search? Is it available to external via API?
We don't really let you like extend the search, like write your own custom search, but it is Postgres flavored SQL. So it's pretty much the most popular industry standard flavor of SQL.
Okay. Can Logfire also capture syslogs?
I'm fairly certain there's OpenTelemetry integrations to capture that sort of information from your machine. Logfire itself doesn't offer them. Our basic premise is we work with OpenTelemetry and wrap it. So there's parts of it where we've already, like you saw SDK, we have kind of our own APIs on top of it that make things simpler and easier. But there's other parts where we haven't dove in. So like if you need a collector, you've got to use the OpenTelemetry collector for now. The good news is it's all available. If you want to instrument a Go application, there's an OpenTelemetry SDK for Go, and you use that. We don't offer a Go specific, Logfire specific SDK for Go yet. Just like we don't offer something Logfire specific to capture syslogs or Kubernetes metrics or stuff like this. But there's an impressive amount of stuff available just from OpenTelemetry that I'm fairly certain there's something to work with syslogs.
Okay. How does Logfire, Longford was in the question, Logfire behave if there is temporarily no internet connection?
Yeah, so we've put some thought into that. It's something we still want to put more thought into, but currently what happens is we have what's called a backfill file. So if we try multiple times to send data, and then after like a certain amount of failures, once we'd have to start dropping data, instead of dropping data, we spill it to disk. So we start writing to a backfill file that's again, like a compressed protobuf file, so we're trying to put as much information, as much little space as possible. And the idea is that if there's a temporary network failure, that will then get sent over the wire. And even if it's a permanent network failure, you can still access the file, and we have an API so you can take that file and then upload it.
Okay. What are the advantages, differences of Logfire versus Grafana, Alloy, Agent, Stack?
I mean, yeah, this is a great...
Hotel Grafana, excuse me. Hotel Grafana.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two axes to this question, right? It's like, okay, you're built on top of OpenTelemetry. What are the advantages of Logfire over just using OpenTelemetry? And I think that, one of the main ones is that it's a lot easier to set up. You have a lot less choices to make. OpenTelemetry is an open source SDK and open source spec, and so you still have to choose who you're sending the data to. You have to make a ton of choices. Like I showed him the other talk about, like configure tracer provider and configure a processor and an exporter and all these things that Logfire just kind of takes care of you with some sane defaults. And also, since it is tied to, by default, send data to our application, there's just less to configure and less concepts to learn. As far as comparing Logfire to other observability platforms, we think that in many ways it's going to be easier to use and more powerful than the existing solutions. Granted, it is a relatively new product, so if you use, just throwing a name out there, Datadog, with all the features of Datadog, we don't have all the features that they have. We'll build them over time. But right now, we're really focused on Python, and we offer features like the auto tracing. We can monitor your event loop. We have really good integrations with Fast API, OpenAI, all these tools that we know that Python developers use day to day.
Okay. Is it available on-premise?
We don't have an on-premise solution yet. We're working on it. Like I said, we're mainly focused on building the best product as quickly as we can right now. And on-premise has a ton of things you need to worry about and think about that we just haven't had time to do yet. We do plan on offering on-premise yet. It's not going to be like a free open source project that you can just clone and run yourself. It's going to be a enterprise offering. We're confident that we're going to be able to offer it at a very competitive price compared to other solutions, but I just don't want you to think that you're going to be able to run it for free at some point.
Okay. How do you handle secrets that may appear or be returned in some query or function call? Is there a way to prevent them being sent to Logfire backend?
Yeah, so we have data redaction built into the SDK, and it's on by default. So if you try and emit a log with the word token or password in it, it's just going to redact that stuff. It's quite aggressive, and you can make it more aggressive or less aggressive by customizing it. But by default, we just try and redact everything that we could possibly be, PII or anything like that. It's not perfect. So I'm not suggesting you just start sending all of your PI to Logfire and we're going to handle all of it. But it's more there so that if you you accidentally start sending some stuff, you should be fine.
Okay. Why a developer may choose Logfire over Sentry?
I mean, we're more, I'd say, compared to Sentry, we're more of a general purpose observability product. Sentry, we use Sentry internally, and you can use both together. Sentry does a great job at tracking errors, probably a lot better than we do right now, or will do at any point in the close future. So we use internally, we use both Logfire and Sentry, so you can use both.
Okay. If I have a project with Python bindings already submitting OpenTelemetry data from the lower level language, how does it integrate with Logfire?
Well, we send OpenTelemetry data and we receive OpenTelemetry data. So you don't need to use Logfire SDK. And that's what I was getting at. Is it's if you have a Go application or even a Rust application, you can send OpenTelemetry data from that to Logfire and we'll receive it just fine. You of course won't get some of the fancier stuff that I showed, like the extracting of fast API arguments, or in Logfire you can send a Pydantic model or a data class and it'll do smart things to serialize and preserve information. You're not going to get that if you're using the plain OpenTelemetry SDKs in some other language, but you can send the data and it will show up there and you'll get the distributed tracing and all of that stuff will work.
Okay, we have no more time for other questions. There is a lunch right now. If you want to have other questions, you can do after beside the. Thank you, Adrian.